For this webinar, please be reminded that your mics have been muted and your cameras have been turned off for the duration of the session. We encourage you to actively participate in the discussion by using the chat function at the bottom of your screens to share insights and discussion points. Please be advised that the AFCC team will also be monitoring the chat room throughout the session. For your questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to address either or all of the panelists. Given the limited time, please be advised that we may not be able to answer all the questions posted. This session will be recorded and screenshots of you will be taken during the session for future publicity purposes. Without further ado, allow me to introduce our moderators for today. Dr. Pia Aquilia is the head of screenwriting at the Australian Film, TV, and Radio School. She's a scriptwriter, script director, editor, who has combined her creative practice with a career in academia. Formerly an associate dean and associate arts professor for NYU Tisch School of the Arts Asia, she was also associate professor and head of program at UNSW Asia and the University of Newcastle. Pia, please. Pieter Herbert is a seasoned writer, producer, and executive producer for many national and international companies, among them Crawford Productions, PBL Productions, Taffner Ramsey, Beyond International, and Granada. He produced the inaugural Comedy Festival Charity Gala in 1992 and created the World Comedy Tour in 2000. He is currently head of screen business and producing at the Australian Film, Television, and Radio School. Pia and Pieter, please.
Hello, hi everybody. Sorry about that little technical glitch. I'm just checking that everyone can hear me. And welcome to Pieter as well. Hello everybody out there. Thank you very much to the Singapore Book Council for inviting us. Today's webinar looks at the screen adaptation, converting your book or story from one medium to another. We're going to be referencing the very authentic rethinking of the young adult novel, My Life as an Alphabet, the much acclaimed novel by Barry Jonesville, and that was brought to the big screen by screenwriter and producer and AFTRS alumni, Lisa Hoppe. Lisa, welcome. We'll soon see Lisa, she will appear. The film's title, H is for Happiness, is an award-winning international feature film. It stars Daisy Axon, Wesley Patton, Richard Roxburgh, Emma Booth, Joel Jackson, Deborah Mailman, and Harry Potter's own Miriam Margolyes. The film was shot in Western Australia and directed by the very lovely John Sheedy. It won big at the Berlin Berlinale Festival. That always gets me, and it was described by Variety magazine as a feel-good entertainment for the entire family without pandering or sacrificing style or substance. What a fantastic quote from such a big magazine, and one that we respect so much in our field. So the film tells the story of Candice McPhee, a 12-year-old girl with boundless optimism and a unique view of the world, and it's inspired by the strange new boy at school as she sets out to mend her broken family, whatever it takes. So that's Candice Fee, the main character and protagonist. So today's session is actually going to look at the 6 fundamental characteristics of screen adaptation, using the creative process of optioning and developing the material for a global marketplace. We will be chatting with Lisa about her formula that made this adaptation a success, and there will be opportunity for Q&A afterwards. And we'll be joined by Pieter at that stage, and Pieter has great expertise in the marketplace as a well-recognised producer. So please use that opportunity to get as much information as possible out of our guests here today. And we also want to make this an interactive session, so please jot down your questions as we go and use the Q&A or chat functions so we can include you in today's chat. Lisa, congratulations on the film. It is simply superb and the writing is magic. I'm intrigued. I know that you've been working in the competitive fields of children's drama and television for many years now, and you have a crash hot reputation here in Australia and internationally, because those programs have travelled, as a TV writer. What I want to know is, why did you decide to do a film, and why an adaptation? Was it a career decision? Take us a few years back to tell us how this all happened.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here to talk to you all. So Pia, I was a television writer, and I am a television writer as well as film. I think I wanted the challenge of film. I'd been in TV for a while, and I was really excited about a new challenge. So that's one of the reasons. And with regard to adaptation, I had written an original feature script, and I was keen to flex my muscles and again try something different. So I wanted to have a go at adapting a book. So that's one of the reasons. And in particular, family. I loved the family film genre when I was growing up and watching with my kids, and they were these sort of small live action films that were doing really well in the US. And we'd made a few here, and I really wanted to explore making one of those films, you know, producing and writing it. So,
yeah, no, that's absolutely wonderful. And I'd be interested in just hearing a little bit more about when you decided it was going to be H is for Happiness. Why did you decide that adapting a novel rather than writing an original was a good vantage point into the marketplace?
It takes less time because to develop an original idea, I mean, you're sort of years in the developing of those ideas and the execution, and a book already has an audience and has a story that has been proved. And I also, myself, I really love structure, and adapting involves, I think one of the big differences between a novel or a source material and a film is how you structure. And that was exciting to me, so yeah.
Yeah, and sorry, Pieter, please.
Can I jump in? And there's pretty, I could wait till the end, but look, there's pretty good evidence that adaptations of successful books, book sales, far exceed original movies in box office takings. So not that anything is a safe bet in our business, but it does give exhibitors and distributors and other investors quite some comfort to know that a book's got a track record in sales.
That's right.
Absolutely. And that really brings us to our first fundamental that we're going to be talking about today, which is authenticity and fidelity. We hear that word bandied around quite a bit at the moment, authenticity. But what I want to know was, how scary was it to adapt the novel My Life as an Alphabet? I mean, it won so many awards. I think it took off or shortlisted in every Premier and Prime Minister's award in Australia, won the Adelaide Festival Award for Literature, the Gold Inky, the Children's Peace Prize, and dozens of international awards. What did you think you could bring to that particular novel for the screen?
Yeah, okay. So in the first instance, it resonated with me personally, and I knew I had to be engaged with the ideas of the project enough to sustain me for a really long time that it takes to get a project from the page to the screen and out to audiences. So I had this kind of two sets of criteria, and one was creative viability, and the book fit into that. It had really themes in a way that I particularly love, full of layers, and the characters are beautifully complex, and yet the story has a simplicity to it. I also knew that because I was looking for something for children, it had to be entertaining. And I saw a lot of scope for playfulness and humour, and there was a lot of action. So those things made that particular book really attractive to me, as well as the fact that it had this sort of commercial criteria that I'd set out for myself. And in short, this meant that audience, which meant exactly as Pieter just mentioned, you know, there's a bit of comfort for those that I'd be pitching to, that it had good sales and a reputation, established audience already. The story had universal themes. So it's about a struggling family, and that's something that families all over the world can relate to. And it has a contained story, and it can be made with a modest budget and great adult roles that cast would like to play, which would help us trigger finance. And so this particular book ticked a lot of boxes for me when I was looking.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We're actually going to touch on some of the points that you've made there, because I think they're really important for anyone considering adapting a book. But going back to your responsibility as a writer to remain authentic to adapting a novel, we always talk about what needed to be changed in a book for various functional reasons or for cost. We don't ever talk about what needed to be retained at all costs. And I was wondering if you could talk to that in regards to the novel to screen edit.
Sure. And I guess the very first question that came up for me was the question of authenticity and fidelity. My goal was definitely to make this adaptation as faithful to the book as I could. And I knew I'd have to streamline the story, but I also knew that what was essential and what I really had to fight for was the tone and the spirit of the book, because it's the tone and the way it straddles pathos and humour and the spirit of the book that's captured in the lead character, protagonist Candice Fee, that for me is this novel's most distinctive and compelling quality. And so that's really what I was really trying hard to preserve that at all costs. She's a unique protagonist with an approach to the world that's utterly delightful and inspiring. And in writing the script, it was really about making sure that every element captured that spirit. So, I mean, I decided from the outset that I loved the dialogue and wanted to retain as much of that as I could. I also found it really useful to use some of Barry's prose as part of the big print where it made sense, because it helped convey the book's distinctive flavour and how it would translate to the screen. In order to get a film made, you have to take a lot of people with you. And if a script is an enjoyable read, as well as doing all the other things it's got to do, it's obviously going to help. But it's just going to add to that. It's you know, condensing a novel into 100 minutes for the screen is a really big challenge, and knowing what to leave in and what to leave out, you know, is really difficult. And there's an additional pressure because you add new elements to help it along as a film. But one key aspect of screenplay writing that helped guide me in terms of what to leave in and what to leave out, or what to, with regard to fidelity and authenticity, is the premise. And that's the theory or the argument the writer is trying to prove or disprove. And it's really the very point of the film, which may be different to the book or the novel.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I you know, theme is such an important aspect of any young adult novel. And as screenwriters, we're constantly juggling the ethical values of our work with the financial reality of bringing the project to market. And sometimes they don't necessarily match up. Talking about that premise, what was that selling hook for the film in terms of theme and story?
For me, it was really, it was the exploration of happiness and whether or not someone, in this case, a very young girl, can bring happiness to someone else. That sort of simple driving question that all the other ideas, everything else, every interchange, every plot point, it all served that discussion. And, you know, if the dialogue and the scenes and the characters and the plots, if they're not helping discover the answer to that central dramatic question or premise, they shouldn't be there. So, yeah.
I think that's really quite an important element, especially for young writers coming out and, you know, really exploring that ability to keep the premise simple and engaging and extremely true throughout the whole film is a very difficult thing to maintain. And, you know, sometimes we overcomplicate both the theme and the story. And, you know, once you've got that key theme, did it allow you then to be able to play around with some of the other messages that you were trying to tell in this story?
Yeah, so the way I sort of looked at a lot of the themes, they mostly translated from the book, but it was when I sort of focused on happiness that it was able to kind of bring that sense of purpose to the story and just drive it straight through the middle as an argument that's set up at the beginning and that's answered at the end. So yeah, definitely by having one, I mean, a film can only actually have one. A script can only have one premise. I don't know with novels. I think, you know, they can do lots of different things, but a film, in terms of premise, can have lots of themes. You can have lots of themes in a film, but some of them become sub-themes. You can you really need one driving idea, because it's too short a time to, and you really need clarity and kind of crispness of that idea.
I totally agree with you. It is such important advice that, you know, to have that one dominant theme. And, you know, because novels do tend to have a lot more sub-themes. You know, I always, you know, look at the teacher's guide for various books and for films. They always list, but there is always that one, and especially when we're trying to sell it to a marketplace, that becomes essential. How is the theme encapsulated there in your premise? And I think taking happiness was very clever as your dominant theme, because it is a message that is as important for the adults in the film as the adults, as the children in the film, and likewise the adults in the audience as well as the young adults in the audience. So it crosses those boundaries. So well done.
Yeah, I mean, and the book is made up of chapters that have, you know, like R is for relief teacher, O is for oblivion. So it could have gone kind of to lots of different places. And I guess that making a choice, whatever it is, and sticking with it is really important.
Yeah, and quite often that choice doesn't come easily. I've seen writers take 2 years to actually come up with that dominant premise. Yeah. How long did it take you?
It's really, I found it really hard, by the way, to kind of, I realize how hard it is to teach, because some of these things, you're making so many decisions, hundreds in a day, and they're kind of instinctive as well as, you know, what you've been taught it after. So it's hard for me to isolate, you know, answer some of those questions, because I mean, the other thing that I was going to say about even having a discussion about the different elements is that they never operate in isolation to each other, and that they really exist. You've got to, as a writer, you've got to integrate them and make them exist at the same time together. And so for me to, some answers, I find it hard to remember, well, how did I come up with that? But it was probably something, you know, that was on my mind, and it might have been, you know, this idea about, you know, can you make someone else happy? Can you one person do that for someone else? And ultimately, perhaps what I was learning at the time is that you can't. And I do think I use writing and the development of a script as my own discovery. So I may not know at the beginning, and then I will know that at the end. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's true authenticity. And, you know, it was interesting as you were talking about really nailing your premise, how important that is, because on this particular project, you weren't just the writer, you were also the producer. And how incredibly busy do you become when you're a writer or a producer and people are asking 1,000,001 questions? But if you have that premise, if you know what you're trying to say, a lot of your answers come out of that, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, so I really can't, emphasize that enough.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Which brings us to characters. And oh my goodness, what a wonderful, fantastic ensemble of characters and cast. Now, tell me more about Candice Fee, her mother and father, and how the family dynamic actually compared to the novel.
I was quite faithful to that. That was all represented. I think I did structurally. I obviously had to structure it differently, but I had to raise the stakes with Mum, so I took her to a much more sort of distressed state, and so that she was packing her bags by the end, which didn't happen in the book, but I needed that for the higher stakes at the end of the film. Dad and Rich Uncle Brian and certainly Candice and Douglas Benson from Action, I tried really hard to make them, absolutely straight from the book, because that was, I felt, where the success of the screenplay would be. Hence, I used, a lot of the dialogue and. But there are characters and things that I changed. I don't know if you want me to step through those.
I'd love you to talk. I'd love to talk through some of those changes, because I'm sure they had important reasons why they needed to be changed as well, functionally. So
in the book, Candice is, she's very quirky, and that was what you're trying to capture in the screenplay. She doesn't have any friends, and until Douglas Benson comes along. So in the book, she's got a relationship with a goldfish who she calls Earth Pig Fish. And having a fish as a friend in the novel, reminds us that she doesn't have human friends. And it's a great device for hearing lots of her in a monologue. Likewise, she's got a pen pal in New York too. And both of those relationships, they're one-sided and they're absent of action. But they work beautifully in a novel, but then that's not going to work so well in a film where you tell stories with images and action. So I did feel I could express some of those thoughts that she shares with the goldfish and with the pen pal. I thought I could do it in dialogue. Some of it's in voiceover. And, I could also get the essence of the two relationships in interactions with other characters. But in their stead, but not as strict replacements, I created two new characters. One is the mini horse. And this basically was inspired by conversations when the project was being pitched at Cannes, where there was an expectation that it was because it was a film, there would be an animal in it. And, this is no mystery. This is about marketing and how the sales agents of these smaller live action, low budget films found it easier to market when they had an animal in the film. So we took that on board and decided that a mini horse would add playfulness and novelty, but it would fit also with a slightly heightened world that our director was, envisaging. And I was able to write it into the climactic scene to great effect. That was really fun. It came as a late idea, but it opened up a whole new set of opportunities for humour and adventure. So that was good. There's another character, Gavin, in the costume shop. He's completely invented for the film. He represents, one of the themes of the film, which is difference, a celebration of difference. And I thought that Candice needed a friend, so she didn't have the pen pal and she didn't have the goldfish. So to give her an adult friend when mum and dad are so distracted felt right. And then to make that friend someone as fun and kind of inventive as Gavin, who likes to dress in different costumes and had all these ideas for her, felt right. And also it gave us a plausible, you know, insight into how she arrived at the costumes that she used for the final act with, you know, when she and Douglas Benson play Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers. So yeah,
which is fabulous.
Yeah, actually, some of the feedback was what, you know, we needed more of Gavin, which was funny.
That's right.
Yeah,
he is a lovely character, and you're right. That and the was it a mini pony, a mini horse?
Yeah, mini horse. Yeah.
It just had such a magical quality about it. All the scenes that start both the mini horse and Gavin. And you made some stunning decisions about casting, especially around diversity. Tell me a little bit more about Douglas Benson and his mother Penelope, and what those characters brought to the film.
Yeah, so Douglas Benson in the book does have a mother and a father, his facsimile parents, as he calls them, which is really fun. But I made them one. I gave him a mother as a single parent because, you know, because we, in our communities, we have, you know, two-parent families and single-parent families, so that felt important. And Douglas Benson, I just loved the kind of quirkiness of this young man who's, you know, I mean, I guess he's a bit of a geek, and but with such an imagination that, I mean, I think the things that I found very endearing about Douglas Benson, like one scene when he decides to engineer Candace inflatable breasts for her birthday, and then, you know, I mean, that was just such a funny thing that Barry had written that I just hadn't, you know, seen that anywhere. And I thought, oh, look, this has got full of twists, full of lovely surprises. And that's, again, what a film has to do, or certainly for kids, you have to be able to surprise and have lots of twists and turns. And Douglas Benson was such a good friend to her. And they, I guess he also, you know, represented difference, and the celebration of difference. And they just let each other live and let live. They supported each other, and I just thought that was just such a, they were just such a great combination of kids. And Douglas Benson's mother, I guess, obviously very anxious. Deb Mailman was just fantastic in her anxiety over this boy who didn't seem to have any friends, and then she was so excited that Candace came along. So, you know, as a parent, you always wonder about, you hope that your kids have friends, and that was a really beautiful, there was so many beautiful ideas in this project that...
Absolute magic. As two characters together on the screen, they were absolutely brilliant. But there was a strong connection between them, as well as this wonderful playfulness. And, you know, that was there in the writing, and I congratulate you. And what about the wonderful teacher? Tell me, how did you get Miriam Margot? Was she on your wish list, or how important was it to cast her?
Yeah, she was John's, absolutely at the top of John's wish list, the director, John Sheedy, who he saw, and we tried really hard to get Miriam, and she ended up coming back and saying no. And John, I was with him at the time when we got the news, and I thought he was going to cry. Anyway, he ended up writing a love letter to Miriam's agent just to say, you know, is there anything, what can we do? We really want you, you're Miss Bamford. And she came all the way over to Albany, and honestly, she was such a sport, working with these kids in this hot, intense classroom. She was pretty funny, bit naughty, but just divine, and everyone fell in love with her. So everything you see or read about Miriam is more than true. She's the most wonderful person, and we were really lucky to get her, and she brought exactly that kind of right amount of naturalism is probably not the right word, but she was very natural and quirky. She was worried about the eye that turned, and we had to explain to her that was going to be fixed in VFX after the film was shot. But yeah, no, she was absolutely fantastic, as were the whole cast. And
you can
what
tell
they brought to their characters. There were lots of little moments. I don't know if you want me to, talk about little moments that I really loved with Richard Roxburgh, who played the father, who was, trying to hold it together, but also very detached, so much weighing him down. And there's a moment in the cemetery scene, and I can tell you a little bit more about the cemetery scene later, which was one of my very favourite scenes upon reading the book. That was really important for me to have that scene in the script, and we nearly didn't get it into the film because of, we didn't have a rain. The rain-making equipment wasn't working, and it was a really bright sunny day, and it was supposed to have this biblical storm in the cemetery, and so we nearly didn't get it in there. But from a writer's perspective, that was important to get it in, because Mum, it was sort of earlier on in the script, and Mum was there kneeling at this gravestone, and by the end of the film, this is where the child that she's lost is. That's where her focus is, down there kneeling in the grave at the cemetery. And by the end of the film, she's sitting on the stairs looking up at the stars. And as a really shorthand visual way of capturing someone's arc, that to me was, I really wanted that moment where she's looking down there because Mum is looking up and at the stars. And the other thing that was in the cemetery scene, again, that I really wanted us to be able to use, was Richard Roxburgh and John had worked out that this moment wasn't in the script. So I'm forever grateful for them, because it's one of my favourite moments. I added that there wasn't a moment where Dad was really vulnerable in the script. And so Richard kind of came up with this moment where he drops down behind a gravestone to hide his tears from his family, and he just sort of has this moment where he weeps. It's seconds on the screen, but it's so moving, and it's so beautiful and so important to his journey and arc. So, I learned a lot by being there on set and learning about these sorts of things. I know that's not open to all writers, but it was really amazing.
That was an amazing scene, and it really shows you what an actor can bring to a character, and it also shows what you can bring with absolutely no words, because it's a silent moment, it's a reaction, and especially for a male character who's in this quite emotional situation and has to be the strong man all the time. We've got a question here from Connor, and he was actually asking how the author felt about the new characters that you introduced on screen. Do you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good question. I think I optioned the book and just wrote the script. I didn't have any interaction with Barry, the author, Barry Johnsberg, during the writing. And when I finished the script, I was pretty nervous, but I knew that I needed to get Barry's endorsement. I knew I wanted him to approve of it, even though, it wasn't sort of part of the deal. And so I sent it off to his publisher, and 2 weeks later I got a phone call from Barry saying he loved it, and he loved it. And then he was on board from then, and we brought him onto set, and he had a little cameo with Miriam Margolyes as one of the as the deputy principal who introduces Douglas Spencer. So he delighted in letting everyone know that he gave Miriam some tips at the time. So Yeah, Barry was a wonderful sport, great, and a great support of the whole of the whole project. Yeah.
And that's a real credit to you as a writer, that it's not always the case. So that's wonderful. You know, we talk about, you know, all the different choices that you had to make in terms of the plot, you know, because you had all these wonderful events in the book, and it's really up to you as a writer to try and select the correct points that are going to forward that premise that we talked about before. How important was Candace's point of view in making these decisions?
Yeah, that was she. It's her point of view that kind of is the whole reason for the story. So yeah, and I guess the way that I captured that was dialogue from the book. Captured it in dialogue, and I did use voiceover. You don't always want to use voiceover in a film, but it worked really well for this one, simply because there's so much inner monologue in the book. And also, I was just really mindful that she would be in every single scene, the actor, Daisy Axon, who is brilliant, and that I guess voiceover helps simplify the shoot, so that to give her some breaks. So, yeah, but her point of view was essential. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably one of the best exponents of central point of view that I've actually seen. I think it's really has great clarity, and because of that great clarity, it really allows you to engage into her plight and the obstacles that she's confronting. It's also interesting because you've got a couple of subplots going on there, but they never dominate the story, yet work always beautifully complementing it. Do you want to talk about those B and C stories?
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that all of the main leads had a story and an arc. Partly because that's what you want, is that was what would appeal to the cast, if they had a proper, genuine journey themselves. So I did have to, I did little things like, not by much, it was quite with a light hand, if you like, but enhance the love story between Candace and Douglas. And that's a sort of a sub-story. Mum, I kind of built her to the point where she wanted to leave the house, leave the family. She felt she was being such a failure as a mother. I guess from the book, the relationship with that rich Uncle Brian was a little bit more simplified, but definitely represented in the film.
It was so great.
Dad's...
You don't shy away from conflict, do you, in this story?
No, I guess that is what really appealed to me. I mean, just on a side note, we've been watching, reading some of the reviews coming back from the US where it's just released, and some of them, are absolutely fantastic. And these reviewers are going straight to the heart of it and writing, and certainly from Europe, actually, some of the comments by juries judging the film, one of them was something like, "We love the emotional diversity." But to me, that's the life that I've experienced. I've really experienced that kind of level of conflict within families, alongside the simple joy of being alive. And they're not actually, I mean, they might be in separate boxes, but they're all true. And I think one of the things that happens in life a bit is that we worry about, if we were a family that went and had picnics and it was all joy, then we couldn't also be the family that had that, had a mum throwing a teapot at the wall, sort of at your head. But I mean, not that my mother threw a teapot at my head, but the experiences of that up and down were really very true for me, and that's what I responded to in the book, and what I felt had to be in the screenplay. Yeah.
And it's so appropriate for, you know, a young adult film, because in fact, you know, Candace is on the threshold of going from child to adult. And unfortunately, it is in that journey when you start to discover that, you know, not everything is a fairy tale. So it's so appropriate to actually do that in this particular genre.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think kids are really open and don't want to be talked down to, and probably most of them do have experiences where, you know, maybe not volatile, but there's conflict, you know. And I think one of the things that Candace gives us in terms of her sort of point of view and her view on life is this great resilience. So, I mean, I love that even after moments with her parents, to me, she shows me that, you know, you can get back on and rise, go in a way higher than her parents are able to go. Like, she seems to know better than them, really. And I think that there's something in that
Absolutely. You know. I think I remember telling my parents that I thought what's best for them too at one particular stage, and that was many years ago. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, the novel, and when we think about novel writing, we think, because you mentioned before about structure, and we think 3-act structure quite often, you know, but we know that cinema, you know, goers these days are very complex. They, you know, they have non-linear presentation of stories, you know, they're so well versed. Do you think the structure of the film is conventional to the 3 acts, or do you think it takes another form?
No, I mean, I think it is built around a 3-act structure. You know, it starts with her in the normal world, life and school. And then the new boy Douglas arrives, and he inspires her to try and achieve this goal of making her family happy. She does whatever it takes, you know, building to the point where she, you know, just jumps into the marina at about midpoint, and things then, you know, start to become much, much harder for her. And, you know, escalates with basically disastrous outcomes until she finally realizes she's failed. But she's learned something very valuable, and while she accepts this new reality, she's an optimist, and that's who she is. And this is revealed during that climactic scene where she emerges as Dolly Parton with Douglas Benson as Kenny Rogers, and they sing Islands in the Stream. So it's still I still think it's built around a 3-act structure. I don't know if my television background, like with television, you've always got lots of stories and subplots going on, and maybe that's why I felt comfortable writing all those sort of other character journeys and weaving them in.
Yeah, and look, I also have this, you know, one of my personal theories, but I think we've been overexposed to fractured narratives or too much story, and we're getting increasingly just thriving and really wanting a story to unfold naturalistically. Yeah. And I think that, you know, and you bring some beautiful elements in it. I mean, there are so many circular references. It's quite brilliant, you know, when you were talking about the blow-up breasts, you know, the blow-up bra, that's there at the beginning of the film, and then it's used to great effect at the end, which is really clever stuff. And, you know, the teacher, Miss Bamford, being there at the beginning and then going off, but there she is again at the climax. So it has those beautiful structural elements that we come to expect from that 3-act structure. So I think you've done a fabulous job in executing that. So
those breasts were very expensive too, by the way. There was a whole lot of things that you know, in writing, you're not thinking, how are they going to design these breasts? But the designer came in with lovely beach balls, you know, those coloured beach balls that, well, you saw that, I mean, they're in the film, but I just thought that was brilliant. And I guess that's where, you know, the script is one layer, and that's why changes, I guess, are going to happen during pre and the shoot, because there are other people bringing their vision for this story. And honestly, a lot of it I couldn't imagine. So
I haven't seen it with a live audience, but I imagine there's just hooting when that happens.
It's pretty good.
It's fantastic. Yeah. Hey, I'm really interested, and you know, I know that, you know, John Sheedy came on board, and you know, he would have had ideas about tone and style, but you, as a producer writer, you were selling the tone and style before you get to that pre-production stage. And I was just wondering what your influences were in terms of tone. Did you have particular examples that you used of other films? Or
no, for myself, no. I really relied on the tone of the book, and I was really trying to capture that in the script. What happened with John was he comes from a great background of theatre and opera, and he had this clarity of vision and style which made it that slightly more kind of heightened storybook world, which was a bit timeless. So while the script lent itself to that style, that genius of how it looked was John's, and I guess a film is it's a director's medium. So the script is that's what you've got until you hand it over. So I put as much tone and as much as I could, but then yes, as a producer, I was there and worked with John on any changes that we needed to accommodate the logistics of this, budget, time, set, or the location. So I was definitely able to kind of, discuss and steer and things like that. But I think we were really aligned. Yeah. And I didn't, once John came on board, there wasn't anyone else I had to convince, and the heads of department came on. Everyone was very aligned once we got to pre.
Oh, and you can see that in the film. It's really quite evident, and it's a really lovely balance of the fantastical and the magic realism. They're there just for the right moments, for those key moments in the drama. So I think they've been built in so beautifully in that. And there has been this wonderful story world. I mean, story world is such a hip topic these days with, young adults today are very, hypercritical of anything that might be illogical in a story world. So it is a really dangerous ground to tread on, and I think it's really important that in the script it's quite clear of what the rules of the world are. And I think you built that in really, really well. Did you find that you had to refer very much to the story world, to your collaborators, maybe, to foreign investors who may not have understood some of the Australianisms about it? Or,
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, and how did you sort of generate a buzz about this magical world?
Yeah, so one of the part of John's vision once we were on set was to create a very timeless place, and a place that could be anywhere around the world, really. So, for example, in the book, Douglas Benson eyes off this great big ravine that he wants to jump off, and Candace cycles every afternoon at 6:30 to try and stop him, because he thinks he's going to get back to his other dimension by jumping. Anyway, we found a ravine in WA in Albany where we were filming, but it was way too scary for the film and for kids. but the other thing that it was in the bush, and John decided that to be consistent with a whole lot of the other decisions that were being made around the world was that we didn't want any gum trees. So, you know, we found a forest, and then that's where the great big tree comes into it, because instead of the ravine, we used Douglas Benson climbing the biggest, scariest tree in the forest. So, yeah, that was part of the world building, definitely, was to steer clear of the bush and gum trees. And also, you'll know, I mean, you can see that there are, I think there are kids with mobile phones. So it's not that it doesn't, that technology isn't being used. It's just that everything is a little bit timeless, a little bit storybook. And you know, the horse and, you know, just even Douglas Benson. I mean, I think in one review I read, they didn't, the reviewer didn't know if Douglas Benson was real or not. Yeah, so there's lots of, I think that the project has actually lent itself to different interpretations, which is absolutely fine, even though that story is quite clear. But to me, I guess I was really trying for something that wasn't ordinary. Just simply, if you're going to make a screen story, there's got to be a reason that it's that you know, that you're pursuing it. And to me, one of the things that I was looking at was that kind of storybook world, and yeah, just the universality of it.
Yeah, I think that's really clear. There's enough to allow us to understand that it is real, and this is a real world with real characters. But then it just tips into that magical world in, you know, the yacht, rich Uncle Brian, enough to really satisfy the young imagination.
Yeah,
because we don't want to be in that real world all the time.
Exactly.
We want to, you know. So I think you've just done an absolutely fantastic job. I've actually seen the film twice now, and I do know it's available on Google Play. I don't know if it's available worldwide on Google Play, but I really do encourage people to watch it and watch it with their family, because it's, you know, it's so wonderful to get a film these days that you can sit down and watch with your family, and that it actually does appeal not only to young audiences, but also to oldies like myself. You know, thank you very much for being able to talk today with us about the actual script and those fundamental tools that you use to actually do an adaptation. We have some really interesting questions coming up, and as we go to the questions, I'm also going to invite Pieter Herbert, who's on the other side of the screen from me. So, you know, in this world of COVID, we're so close yet so far. We'll be a bit of a tag team on this. There was a wonderful comment before. Someone said, Lisa, I'm learning so much, thank you. Do you have a strategy in adapting a novel to a film screenplay? Do you list all the chapters and convert them into scenes? Do you decide a structure and plug scenes from the novel into it? Or is it more free-flowing than that? Can you describe your writing process? Great question about your practice.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, so the first thing that I did was I just became incredibly familiar with the material so I could move it around in my head. And it is about structure. And so I was so familiar that I'd go, I know Mum said that, but if I put that there, it will, you know, do something different, or it will build in the way that I need it to build. And so it was really about becoming very familiar with the material, and then a bit of, just kind of finding my way. I don't know if that's, whoops.
Do you use cards? Do you break it down into cards? I mean, I don't use them as much, but I know some people find it really useful.
Yeah, probably with an original I do, and I did. But with this one, one, I just wrote a lot. I just wrote a lot, took a lot of notes, and it just became very familiar in my head so that I could move it. I didn't use cards for this one, no.
Yeah. I think I said to one of our writers very recently, maybe even yesterday, you need to live inside the skin of your characters as you're writing. And you know, and I imagine, you know, because we've both worked in television together and sometimes on the same show where you're actually responsible for a character as part of being in a script room, and you've just got to think and act like that character. And, you know, I suppose it's more like a performance in that way. Yeah,
I mean, I did write, so I meant to say, I wrote lots and lots of lists. You know, like I did write that structure and I would rewrite it until I could see. So I guess that's similar to cards, but for me it's more of I'm watching the shape of it in a list of beats, if you like, rather than writing cards. And
So I'll thank Lisa Tay for that question. Yes, Pieter.
Just to go back to process, the idea here of making so many choices, so many fundamental choices, Lisa, at what stage are you talking to your director? And if not your director, are you consulting with anybody else as you bounce these choices off? I mean, is there somebody editing, or what's your feedback mechanism at that very early stage when these big decisions are being made?
Okay, so I think I see it like a collaboration with the author. So in TV, you've got a room and lots of people coming in, and, you know, an idea gets put across the table and it'll get shot down in a second if it's not a good one. And but with film, and certainly with adaptation, I feel like you're working with the author. It's almost like a conversation with the author. That's how I see it. So that's who I'm having a conversation with in my mind. And then when I'm finished, it's over to other producers. You get lots of feedback, and I'm always happy to work with the whole team about adjusting it and making it work for the screen, to incorporate their ideas, and especially the directors. But I mean, in those drafts before it goes out, it's me and the author.
That's so interesting, because you've created a character out of the author, your own character. So you've characterized the author in order to have a dialogue with it. It's like a separate piece of work, a separate story. So, you know, tonight we're going to have a story, a dialogue about this. That's pretty interesting. Just on a mechanical side too. So at what stage when you're reading, do you show the book around at all to other people before you actually go to the rights? You know, say, I like this, I think this should be good. Or are you trusting your own or backing your own judgment there?
I read it a while ago, and then I read it a couple of years before I optioned it. And I guess the test for me was the test of time, that it still had a lot of power and pull for me. And I just, and I had done producing at AFTRS. So I felt I had a lot of information about what might fly, what that marketplace looked like. So I felt confident about it. And I decided to back myself anyway.
So you're gonna recommend this method. I think this method is terrific, where you're both producing and writing, because you're essentially making key decisions about the audience, but you're backing it up with your own creative input, and that's pretty good. Pretty good approach.
Yeah.
Very.
Yeah. Thank you. It did work for this one.
There's a really good question here from Agnes, who asks, you know, it's that, you know, a book like that, Barry's book, it builds up a huge fan base, I imagine. And, you know, sometimes readers get very stuck to the original story in the book. When watching the movie, did you find people were making comparisons to the book? You know, did they miss anything? Did they wish something was there? Or were they really, what were the responses to it from that fan base, if you know?
To be honest, I would, I guess we might have been expecting some, but we didn't get any. We just got a really positive reaction. Yeah, I'm honestly, I'm trying to think, and even right down to, I don't know how it's out there now, but it's now out, not as My Life as an Alphabet, but it's been published as H is for Happiness. So, yeah, no, the response was positive, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some people out there who felt some bits, they missed some bits, for sure.
Yeah, well, that's also another great honour, isn't it, that the book's been retitled for H is for Happiness, and it goes back to your premise, Lisa. See how important it is, you know, and one of the things that, you know, we learn is that your pitch for the story, for your film, needs to be as strong as what it's going to be on the poster when the film is finished. Yeah. And that is so essential in terms of creating a premise, and that's what distributors, you know, and financiers really want to hear. They want to hear the words that are going to be on that movie poster that's going to attract people, that's going to bring them there. But before we move into sort of talking about those kinds of more theatrical release kind of stuff, Lisa Tay has a really interesting question that I'm going to throw open to both you and Pieter, because you both have experience and knowledge in this area, about the option agreement or the adaptation agreement. What did you need to do in order to collaborate, find information, go about making the option agreement with the original author? And how long did, you know, that option last for? And yeah, if you don't mind going through some of those things, it's a wonderful learning experience for us all.
So I attended a couple of, I'm just trying to think, maybe it was for Vivid. There was a publisher pitching sort of fest, and the publishers would, I don't know if they must have pitched some of their novels, and then they would, it was some sort of speed dating with publishers. And I remember meeting the publisher for Allen and Unwin at that. And then later on, so I simply had her card and I rang up and said, is that book, which I had read previously, still available? And she said, yes. I explained who I was, that I was a writer and a producer. And I optioned for, I think the first option period is about a year, and that you basically have milestones where you have to prove that you've progressed the sort of either the script or the selling of the script, the idea. So you might have pitched at a few different producing conferences or something. You've got a producer on board, or you've got the script started. You know, you might have a first draft, and then you extend that by another year. And again, you're proving milestones, because I guess the last thing that the publishers want are for people to option books and then just sit on them and nothing happens. So you've got to come up with these milestones that are agreed upon in the contract. And then I think we just hit that third option period when we were going into filming. So, yeah.
Because it is a really important question for writers. I know with the writers in the MA program here at AFTRS, you know, they quite often option their ideas, and then there is the option to re-option and to extend the option. And, you know, this thing comes up all the time, and that is, well, you know, how do you sell your idea and ensure people are not sitting on it, because you could be selling it to someone else. And, you know, what can you build into your option agreement that actually ensures that the other party is active.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Peter, you might have some things as well. Yeah, you go.
I think this is a really interesting area. Obviously, from your producing perspective, you're backing yourself, and there's a monetary value in that. You actually have to put some money up in order to advance the, you know, that generally that consideration of the money is the deal between you and the publisher and the author. So you need to keep that in mind, that, you know, you're in an ideal world, you take an option and you get to the project fairly quickly. But as you say, you were in the third year, so you're in that situation generally where if you want to extend beyond the 3 years, you have to prove to the author or the publisher that you've made some significant progress. In your case, you had, so that's pretty good. But it's not uncommon to go for 3+3. In other words, a movie can take easily 6 years to get to screen. So that sort of thing means that you're actually spending quite a lot of option money, and it all mounts up as a sort of sunk cost, a cost that's not recoverable. So in putting on the hat of producer, you're adopting the risk.
Yes.
And generally an author, a screenwriter is actually risk-free in that respect because they're working for a producer. So it's quite a significant tension you add to yourself. On the other hand, you are owning the project in a way that's more and more common these days. So the writer-producer is another version of the showrunner in essence. And so the ability to option and shape your own career is becoming more and more important. And indeed, streaming platforms prefer that. They've gone to the level where they want to be as close to the creative talent chain as possible. So it's a good way to go. It's a good way to go. In this case, I think there's a question there. I'm just looking it up. What other medium do you consider to adapt the book? Well, the reality is you would have only optioned the feature film rights. I'm guessing that, but yeah. So for the purposes of people who want to know the answer to that question, all of the rights to any one of the platforms, whether it's TV or film or animation or stage adaptation, they're all separate rights, and it would be highly unusual, or you'd have to be very rich to take all of the platforms as options. You usually stick to just one. For example, Harry Potter as a stage adaptation would be an enormously costly investment to make. So so that question really goes to the issue of focus on getting what you need to get the film made, not what you think you might do after you've got the film made. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew. Yeah. So all of this is, if I may put in a plug for you and for us, Lisa, all of this is something that you would cover in a producing degree, because you go through this. This is bread and butter, creative management on the part of the producer. So that's a very quick summary of the issue. But books are considered to be safe, as I mentioned earlier. More risky might be to take a true life event, but that's optionable. And obviously, we're working with one of Lisa's teachers, Mary McGowan. She optioned a stage play. So all of these things are different ways of getting to a story that you'll think will make a good film.
So Pieter, am I right in assuming we have a question from Texim Chongtek, about is it any different when you're adapting a picture book in terms of option agreement?
No, the picture book exists as a piece of intellectual property, and the intellectual property exists in the published form, so the picture book published form. So you're optioning that property, and it doesn't really matter whether it's all pictures, all words, or the libretto from an opera. It doesn't really matter. You're specifically optioning the published format, and a picture book is just simply another format that you might consider optioning.
And I suppose it becomes more complex if somebody was interested in making a TV show, because now we have a film version and the original novel. That gets into tricky territory, doesn't it, Pieter and Lisa?
I'll throw to Lisa in just a second, but my favorite show at the moment is Cobra Kai, which is an adaptation of The Karate Kid. And if you want to understand some of the intricacies of optioning materials, you'll find that the first series and the second series have an agreement to use original footage from the Karate Kid 1. They're using actors' images. They're recreating those actors' characters and indeed casting original actors in the series. And they're using original settings like the production design and the locations. All of those things would by agreement, be intellectual property in published format that you have to have an agreement on. So when you go from a film to TV, there's an awful lot that you need to take across, or vice versa. And so you have to be a sharp producer and probably have to have a pretty good lawyer. Lisa, over to you on that.
No, absolutely agree. It's the, certainly if you're, when it comes to getting finance or funding, the first thing they're going to ask you is, do you have chain of title? And the chain of title is that, you know, the IP that Pieter's talking about. And it might be, like Pieter said, it might be photographs, it might be any creative property, intellectual property that's associated, gets developed, and then another. You've got to actually get options from all of those people, everyone who's involved.
I think it's worth even emphasizing that that's everybody involved from the beginning of the project to the realization of the project. So you might have had a script editor or a consultant early up that you no longer work with, and that might be 4 years ago, or it might be longer. When you get to the agreements that get the film actually made and distributed, you've got to be able to produce them in physical form. So that is the long chain. And I've seen projects fall over because people are very nervous if not every link in the chain is covered.
Yeah.
Does that idea ever frighten you, Lisa, about, you know, the legal side of things and, you know, how litigious it can end up being in many of these cases? You know, it does take a kind of bravery, doesn't it, to be able to take a project on board like this and, you know, take it from A to Z. Yeah, no, I mean, it is, you know, I think if it was easy, everyone would do it. That's what, I think producing's really hard. And I guess for me, in terms of happiness, I just kept it quite clean so that I didn't have those worries. So I optioned it, I wrote it. I didn't actually have anyone consulting. And then it kind of, you know, went into production. So it had a very clean chain of title. But I have worked on things that haven't. And yeah, it's more stressful, definitely. We want to keep that chain of title clean, if possible. And Lisa, I know this is a tricky question, but what's next for Lisa Hoppe, writer and producer? Yeah, it's not that tricky. I'm actually working on another adaptation, similar to model to H for Happiness. I've optioned a book. A New Zealand author who's set this film, it's a young adults, award-winning, near Goulburn, near Canberra. And yeah, it's set slightly in the future where honeybees no longer exist and they use poor children to climb up and pollinate the trees. And the little
lead protagonist gets taken from this place, which is her world on the orchard, to the city to become a servant where cash is paid. So she's got to work for a wealthy family. And there's a daughter there, and they clash, and they work out how to help each other because that daughter is agoraphobic. So it's set slightly in the future, after a great famine. So, but it's actually uplifting. It's a family film. So even though I'm tempted to say it's Handmaid's Tales for kids, it's much more. I know. It's much more uplifting, and it's got the family, sort of.
Yeah. May I say, just for the people listening, and indeed for all of us, right. What Lisa just did there, some beautiful pitching right up front. The honeybees are gone, and we've got little kids climbing up, pollinating. What a great visual image! You know, you've got the characters and the jeopardy and the what's going to happen next, all there in about 20 words. So that was great.
And I think it's fantastic because, you know, our hot topic of conversation around these offices these days is, what are people going to want to watch after COVID? You know, because I don't think we want to see the dark post-apocalypse kind of stuff. And we do need something that is really uplifting, but at the same time acknowledges what we've been through. Oh my gosh, and that book sounds so good.
Yeah,
it seems
really fun.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw, one of our final questions to Pieter, because I know he talks about this a lot, and we talk about it a lot in the way that we train young producers and writers and showrunners, and that's about zeitgeist and being able to tap into something that is both contemporary, universal, but relates to many different societies.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot, and this is a core part of both the producing and writing degrees at AFTRS. The ability to think and test what's going on in the world that's more than relevant, more than news, is really a terrific skill for both writers and producers. And as I was listening to that pitch just then from Lisa, the idea of the anxiety and stress that's current in the COVID situation starts to percolate through into stories. You know, the idea that kids of reactions to 2020 will be, in many respects, one of stress, particularly in that sort of early teens or people entering the teen years. So that's, I think, going to be a zeitgeist issue. But when Lisa said earlier, and I'm talking a lot about you, Lisa, here, but when you said earlier that you're having dialogue with an author, the author of the book, you know, I think in the creative industries, you're always having dialogues, if not in the physical real, with yourself or with the people that you're closely working with about, my God, this is happening. What does that mean? What are the implications of the things that are going on around us? I mean, to pick up on another example, regarding COVID, has tended to cut against the notion of globalization and bring back the idea of nation and border. That's a big shift, and that would not have been predicted 5 or 6 years ago. Just would not have been predicted. So those sudden shifts become more and more important. So that idea that you can constantly be entertaining dialogue in your head as to, wow, that's interesting. Why did I find that interesting? What am I reading that's interesting? All go to these zeitgeist issues, and you pick up on it. And the sort of sleeping little mental health issue in H's for Happiness, which becomes manifest as the story goes on, is pretty relevant and pretty spot on for a zeitgeist issue.
Yeah.
So Lisa, thank you very much. We're coming to the end of our time for today's session. We really do appreciate your generosity and also your authenticity and bravery. You've given such wonderful insights today, and you know, not always people are that open and generous with their practice and being able to pass on some of that valuable information to others who are in the same position, looking to adapt work or, you know, basically looking to have their work adapted by someone else. So I think, you know, today's session has really, for me, really filled an enormous gap that we're, you know, often talking about, which is that adaptation. And, you know, they talk about prestige in the adaptation market, and, you know, each intellectual property comes with a certain prestige, and the market really wants to have that prestige because they see it as, I suppose, proof of success in some ways. But through all of that, as a producer and as a writer, you've maintained really true to your original source material. We've talked about the really importance of fidelity. You've talked about the real importance of being passionate and loving your characters, and that's certainly clear in the film. And you've made something that's incredibly palatable for, you know, really diverse and global audiences. It basically relates to all of us, and not necessarily if you're just a young adult. It's a lovely movie. Congratulations. I urge everybody to take a moment and see if they can, you know, find it online, or hopefully it will be coming to Southeast Asia really shortly. And it is a wonderful example. And we wish you all the best of luck, Lisa, for your new adaptation. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you very much for the Singapore Book Council letting us have this chat today. Good night, everybody.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, Pieter, and Pia for this webinar. We would also like to thank everyone for joining us for today. I hope that this has been a fruitful session for you. Please scan the QR code on your screen to give us your feedback about the session. We'll give you a couple of minutes to scan the code or to copy the URL on your screen onto your browser now. Rest assured, your feedback will be treated confidentially and we will use to improve future webinars and workshops. This webinar is presented as part of the Asian Festival of Children's Content 2020 Digital Symposium. Do check out the AFCC website at www.afcc.com.sg and follow us on our social media for more information. We will have more sessions and programs running from today to the 4th of October. That's this Sunday. You are still able to purchase a digital pass if you have not done so yet. Thank you for joining us today, and we wish you a pleasant weekend ahead. Please note that you can now leave the meeting, and once this session closes, you will be automatically logged out of the session. From all of us here at the Singapore Book Council, remember to be someone's reason to smile today. Thank you very much, everyone.